It's a study that would have been music to the ears of Hitler, Stalin and the rest of the 20th century's dictators, said the Daily Mail, but it may make uncomfortable reading for the rest of us, and it definitely made uncomfortable reading for me. I, as a democratic practicing politician for most of my life, would never have put into words the theory developed by the people conducting the study, namely that people in the West, in democracies, are too dumb, too stupid to pick the right people to lead us. Now, I know that there's lots of evidence in our political leaders and the lack of ability in many of them that tends to suggest that the survey may be onto something, but we thought we better talk to the horse's mouth, as it were, the lead psychologist at Cornell University leading the study, Professor David Dunning, who joins us from the United States. Professor Dunning, thanks very much for joining us here on The Week. Governor Adlai Stevenson famously opined when voted out of office, "The people have spoken, the bastards." But he might have said, according to your study, "The people have spoken, the idiots."
Possibly. That is what we do work here at Cornell on, is whether or not people really have an adequate impression of their expertise. Do people know when they're experts, and do people know when they're anything but experts? And essentially what we tend to find in whatever area of life we test is that people who are knowledgeable, people who are experts, pretty much know how expert they are. They know the shape of their knowledge. But people who aren't, people who have gaps in their knowledge or deficits in their expertise, tend not to know that they have these gaps. They often think they're doing just fine and making absolutely splendid judgments.
Well, indeed, although that would point us in the direction of a kind of meritocracy, wouldn't it, where you'd take an IQ test to see whether you qualified for the vote or not. I understand, of course, what you mean, and I understand the kind of evidence that you might well have gathered. I don't know if the George Bush era was a case in point. But, of course, as Churchill put it, democracy is the worst system of politics apart from all the others.
No, and I think that's right, because I think one protection we potentially might have in a democracy is that some people might be politically knowledgeable, and some people may not be all that politically knowledgeable but think they're politically knowledgeable. But at least we're working together in a democracy. That is, to the extent that we're all voting, and we're all voting from all the various corners of society, there is at least some wisdom that arises from numbers. That is, the errors of judgment that I'm making are canceled out by the errors of judgment that you might be making, that are also being canceled out by errors of judgment about some other person might be making. So I think Winston Churchill was right, is that democracy is hardly a perfect vehicle. But, boy, it sure looks good relative to all the other vehicles we've ever tried.
That's right. Now tell me, how did you establish the dumbness, the dumb quotient amongst the electorate? What tests did you run?
Well, we haven't done that work directly. What we've just been doing is looking to see to what extent people who are, I won't use the term dumb, but I will use the term inexpert. These are poor performers. I mean, these are people we've all met in our everyday lives. We've looked to see to what extent people who are poor performers have any sort of insight whatsoever to the fact that they're poor performers. And the answer is they don't have much insight, but then it goes beyond that. And this is inching closer to a discussion you can have about voters, which is that if we ask people to judge who among them are the most competent, for example, who among us are the best leaders, or who among us have the most knowledge when it comes to public policy, it's very hard not only for poor performers to spot the really competent people, the really smart people. It's actually difficult for almost all of us because we're not competent enough to spot the really, really competent, the geniuses, if you will, among us. We simply don't have the skill or the expertise to recognize how right they are. And we haven't done it, but there is a scientist in Germany who's run computer simulations that if this is true, and our data suggests this is true, what happens is when people are trying to pick the best leaders, but they don't necessarily know what best leadership looks like, what happens is your best leaders don't survive any election. People don't understand how good they are. Now, mind you, people who are below average in leadership also don't survive the election, but what you end up with in this computer simulation are the best people being eliminated and the worst people being eliminated, and you're left with leaders who are
mediocre.
No, not mediocre. They're just a hair above mediocre, I think is the way to put it. They're not below, but they certainly aren't the best.
And any way forward from this? Better education, better propaganda from the parties? I mean, they're not short of dollars spent on propaganda in your country, but it's still...
Well, it is. Yeah.
No, I'm looking at the Republican field, and believe me, I'm not a supporter of the Democrats, but I'm looking at the Republican field, and I'm thinking that the Republicans in the U.S. are the party of business, and by and large, the party which most rich and successful people in the U.S. belong to. And yet I look at the field of candidates that they've produced, this time at least, and not for the first time, and wonder, is this the best America can do?
Well, we'll see. It is a remarkable year because we have been going through these Republican primary elections across the states, and the popularity of the candidates have been going down as opposed to up. And as a political party, that's not the trend you want to see.
No.
But, it's an interesting question. It's going to be a complex question because let me mention just one way in which making your electorates be informed just got more complex, which is it used to be the case that people could go to their evening news or go to their news magazines and read what was going on in the country. But now everybody has the Internet, which means that your information can be coming from anywhere. People can scurry into little corners of the Internet that perhaps play to their prejudices more than educate them. And so it's going to be interesting as we move on, where people can pretty much select whatever information they want to get, creating a situation where people are informed, and informed in such a way that they can actually have a dialogue with one another, which is one thing we seem to be missing as we go on from year to year, at least in the United States.
Well, not just in the United States. Thanks very much, Professor David Dunning, psychologist at Cornell University.